New York is famous for many things: the Empire State Building, the Statue of Liberty, the excitement of Times Square and Broadway. Unfortunately, it's also famous for its potholes. And every city in the world has potholes. It just seems as though our potholes are bigger. David Letterman said recently that he found a pothole on 8th Avenue that was so big, it had its own Starbucks. Are potholes a problem? Well, the AAA says that the average motorist spends about $800 a year maintaining their vehicles because of the problems with the roads. Now, when we talk about infrastructure, we usually talk about bridges, dams, highways, big things. Today we're talking about the potholes, a small thing. Why? Because it's a microcosm, a metaphor for the way America approaches its infrastructure problems. This past winter, New York had the worst pothole season on record. 300,000 potholes were found and filled. Here we see the mayor, Mayor de Blasio, doing his civic duty, filling a couple of the potholes he inherited when he took office. What's actually interesting about this photo is the headline, "The harsh winter." It was the winter that caused the potholes. It was the cold weather and the snow. And indeed, we had a terrible winter from that standpoint. But was it God? Was it an act of God that caused the potholes? Was God trying to punish us for some reason? I think there must be another reason. Now, the city was proud of the fact that they filled 300,000 potholes. Is this good public policy? Let's say we're out in the far west. Isn't this like if we came across 300,000 dead cows and we did a great job burying them and we were proud of that, without ever asking the question, why were there 300,000 dead cows in the first place? That's the problem we need to ask, and that's the question we need to solve. Certainly for bridges, everybody knows it doesn't make sense to let the bridge to fail before you maintain it. And why would you not wait to prepare for a potential disaster? We understand that that's good policy, but let's look at potholes. What's happened? What's the recent history with potholes? Was it the winter that caused the bad pothole conditions that we saw this year? Here's a plot of the last 15 years for potholes in New York City. New York City does a great job of monitoring, filling, and reporting on the potholes it works on. And here you can see a consistent and steady trend upward. Too consistent for it to be the weather. Maybe climate change? I don't think so. You can see here back in the mid-90s, we had around 80,000 potholes or so, which is not bad for New York City, but the trend grew all the way through the end of the 90s and the early part of the first decade of this century, all the way up to the point where we now experience 200 to 300,000 potholes a year, which is not good for our motorists. Now let's take a step back and look at the road system. Here's the neural network of streets in New York City. About 30% of the land area of New York City is asphalt. And if you measure that, the road system, by the white lines down the middle of the street, you would come up with about 6,000 miles of white lines. But the civil engineers don't think of it that way because they know that some streets are wider than others. So if you had a street that was 3 lanes wide, or about 12 feet per lane, so 36 feet wide, that was 1 mile long, they would say you have 3 lane miles of asphalt. Well, if you take those 6,000 miles of white lines and you do this calculation, you see that New York City has about 20,000 lane miles of city streets, or about a 1-lane road all the way around the world, a daunting task to maintain. Well, what is the condition of all those roads? The city actually does a very good job of monitoring the condition of the roadways. They follow an engineering procedure of going out and evaluating each street on a 10-point scale. And then they report in the mayor's management report how many of those roads are rated acceptably good. It turns out that back in the 90s, the mid-90s, it was about 85%. You can't quite see it on the chart there, but 85% good. Not bad, not bad. But then you see a rapid and consistent decline for about a 10-year period, and then a stabilization late in that, on the chart. What could be causing this? What could be causing this? Well, the city maintains its roads, major road work, by doing road resurfacing, putting a new layer of asphalt on top of the road, very often milling up the old asphalt for recycling purposes. Now, back 25 years ago when I was transportation commissioner, we did some simple estimates, and we came to the conclusion that the city would need to do about 1,000 lane miles of road resurfacing each year just to maintain the roads at a constant condition, either constantly good or constantly bad, but just constant. I called that orbital velocity, maintaining your position. If you wanted to improve things, you needed to do more. 1,200 lane miles, maybe 1,500 lane miles. I called that escape velocity. And we actually got up to 1,500 lane miles back in the early 90s. But if you did less than 1,000 lane miles in a year, the roads would get worse. Well, let's look at what happened over the last 15 years. Here's a plot of the lane miles resurfaced by the city over the last 15 years. And you can see for those 10 years where the roads were declining, it was an obvious reason. They were doing less than 1,000 lane miles per year. And if you look at each year, the difference between that dot and the 1,000, the solid line 1,000, creates a backlog, a gap. And each year, as that gap gets bigger and bigger, the roads get worse and worse. And if you added up all those gaps, today we have a backlog of about 2,500 lane miles of road work, or about a one-lane road all the way across America, from here to Phoenix anyway. That's a pretty long road to have to resurface. So what does this tell us about potholes? What does it tell us about potholes? Well, if you take the data and you put it into a graph like this, you see that as the gap along the horizontal line, as the gap got larger, the potholes went up. And this is too significant to ignore. That's the reason. It's our failure to maintain, to do enough infrastructure renewal that causes the potholes. It's not an act of God. It's a failure of public policy. Well, what does an analytics professor do with data? Takes all that data and throws it in the computer and runs the computer and comes up with a formula, which I modestly call Riccio's pothole equation. And in another gesture of humility, I refer it as the F equals MA of potholes. Now, this formula is a very good predictor for New York City. It turns out, I suspect that it's probably good for most cities in America. And I'd love to see somebody actually test it out. But let's look at this formula. What does it say? It says that, well, the snow has an effect, but that failure to maintain the roads is the big nut here. So what this says is that for every lane mile behind that gap, every lane mile of gap, we get about 80 new potholes a year. And for every inch of snow, we get about 930 or almost 1,000 potholes for every inch of snow. Now, what did I say? I said that we have a backlog of about 2,500 lane miles. And the mayor's budget this year has a budget of 1,000 lane miles, which, as you recall, that's orbital velocity. So we're going to stay with about 2,500 lane miles in our gap as we approach next winter's pothole season. So you do the calculation. Everybody get out your calculators now. I want you to do the... No, okay, I've already done it for you. If you take the gap of 2,500 lane miles and you multiply that times 80, what do you get? You get 200,000. We're starting with a base of 200,000 as we approach next winter's pothole season. Now let's throw in 50 inches of snow, and that's not unusual. We had more than that this year. You're talking about another 40 or 50,000 potholes. What does this mean? This means that the rate we're going now, we're going to face another horrible pothole season next year and in the years to come. And they're just going to get more and more. The prediction says 200,000 to 300,000 next year and the years to come. And they're just going to get bigger and nastier. David Letterman is fortunately retiring, so we won't be able to talk about them anymore. But you can see that they'll get much worse. Now, why are we talking about potholes? Because they're a metaphor. They're an indication of how we treat infrastructure in general. And you can see that even the big infrastructure is having trouble in America. The American Society for Civil Engineers keeps track of America's main infrastructure. And this is the grades it gives America for its infrastructure. Not good. Countries like Japan and Germany, where they actually listen to their engineers, have much better infrastructure. And I'm not just talking about transportation infrastructure. The internet, that's another form of infrastructure. And look at South Korea, 2 to 3 times the connectivity that we have in America. Now, why is this important? Why is infrastructure important? Well, it's the driving force behind our economy. And if we think of New York City, since it's one of the major factors in America's economy, you can see that the growth of New York City, its economic development, was pegged to 4 great eras of transportation infrastructure development. First, the Great Harbor, the world's greatest protected harbor. Secondly, the opening of the Erie Canal opened up America's breadbasket and the bounty of Middle America to the European markets. Thirdly, the great period of bridge building, which connected all the boroughs, and created a lot of connectivity. And then lastly, the invention of a safe elevator that could allow for high-rise buildings, and of course the subways. Those two together enabled New York City to have the density that was needed to create the opportunity for great economic growth in law, in finance, in media, and in the arts, which makes all those are the things that make New York great. And the message is very clear. A strong infrastructure leads to a strong economy. A deteriorating infrastructure indicates a deteriorating economy. When Vice President Biden said a few weeks ago that LaGuardia was a third world airport, he wasn't disparaging New York or LaGuardia. He was saying America needs to be more aggressive about its infrastructure renewal. It needs to have a plan, not just in recessions. Oh, you hear people say, oh, it's a recession, we should do some infrastructure. No, we should be thinking about it all the time. We need to have a plan to keep us strong. America is the #1 economic power in the country, in the world. America's greatness can be measured in many ways. We need to have a plan for maintaining and improving our infrastructure. And I hope my little story about potholes here, the lowly little pothole, will focus our attention on regaining that infrastructure greatness. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.